Yellow and Red mix by 27. Chapter 35. Naruto flew across the rocky plateau, but contrary to how that might have gone 6 months ago, he managed to twist his body in the air and land on both feet in a solid 3-point stance. Immediately, he had to use his one grounded hand to flip himself up and forwards over his brutish attacker to avoid the knee that would have sure impacted with his chin otherwise. Once again, he had barely moments to stay on the ground before he was forced to evasively dodge to one side, rolling along his shoulder to soften the impact. Currently, he was stripped down to just his normal shinobi pants and sandals. The only other thing he was wearing was a sheen of sweat which was glistened over his bare torso. They had been at this for hours, the intense physical exercise enough to even overcome the chill of the late winter air this high in the mountains. Finally, he caught a break as he slid to the ground in an impressive split, letting his attacker's fist sail over his head. He grabbed said extended limb before scissoring his legs together along the ground to capture his opponent's legs. Using the man's large body as leverage, he flipped himself around to land firmly on the man's exposed back. Mindful of the swords that were strapped there, he still had a grip on the man's arm and pulled it around sharply to hold him in a painful submissive hold, one that would allow his teammates to tie him up in that scenario. He smirked, but his slightly overconfidence got the better of him as the man overpowered his hold with brute force alone and threw Naruto back. Once again, he dropped down into a ready stance that would have allowed him to attack or defend, but his sparring partner held up a hand. That's enough for today, Naruto. I think it's about time we go. Yujito's been teaching you some killer moves. It's really been helping out your groove. Naruto just smiled at the compliment, going over to where their gear was stashed and throwing his lightweight training shirt on. Alright, B-sensei, Fu and Yujito should be finishing up now. We can go swing by them. The large-muscled man nodded his agreement, pulling on the rest of his own equipment. He also beamed a little. One of the man's favorite things about Naruto was the sensei title. It made him feel good to impart his knowledge. Much to his displeasure, Naruto hadn't quite taken to rap as his first encounter would have him believe. However, unlike most, he didn't completely dismiss B for it either, which he was appreciative of. They jogged out of their training ground towards another further down the mountain, where the air was a bit thicker. It had taken Naruto a while to get used to the high altitude that training in Kumo required, but once he found fighting lower down even easier. He was told it had something to do with oxygen and adjusted dependencies, but he wasn't too bothered with the specifics as long as it worked. One of his favorite training grounds was the one at the very top of the second tallest mountain in Kumo. It was the most peaceful place Naruto had ever visited, without any animals of people or for ages in any direction. He was surrounded by the chilled air and the fluffy white clouds below him. Fu also seemed to like it when he took her up there one night. Naruto smiled as he thought of his surrogate sister. The two of them had really bonded in their time in Kumo, and he couldn't wait to introduce her to Takuya. That name brought him a small frown. It had been 6 months since he had left Sunagakure, and he had yet to hear from Gaara or his girlfriend. He understood that it might be difficult to locate him, and that she was on a difficult and dangerous mission, but he thought this was long enough. He sighed, knowing there was nothing he could do about it without going back to Suna himself, which he wouldn't do. He had promised to return stronger, and he didn't believe he was there yet. That wasn't to say his training wasn't effective. He trained with both B and Yujito. After she had warmed up to him, of course, B would put him through his paces with physical exercises and training his rapidly growing lightning affinity. Yujito would help him with his overall flexibility and his taijutsu. He had managed to incorporate aspects of her very bendy style into his own. They shared the fact that their main style was on all fours, a lot of the time due to their respective biju. Both of them would help him with his Jinchuriki-specific training, working with Kyuubi's chakra. He had now mastered the fourth tail, being able to call upon it without losing his mind. The power boost he got during that state was unimaginable. It still hurt like hell afterwards, but now that his and Kyuubi's chakra were more in sync, there was less damage. Fu had also begun her training in being a Jinchuriki, taking her first meditative steps into her own mindscape not a week after arriving in Kumo. Chomei's chakra was now steadily flowing through her corals, widening them and vastly improving her already decent reserves for somebody with minimum training. That wasn't the only area she was trained in. Yujito had practically taken the girl under her wing. She was trained in every element of being a kunoichi. Yujito's taijutsu mixed with Naruto's ninjutsu, and her all-around stamina made her effective. She was still inexperienced and a little rough around the edges, but she was advancing quickly, much to Naruto's satisfaction. He and B helped out where they could, offering tips from their own experiences handling a high-tailed biju. But in the end, it just seemed Yujito could do more for her. That wasn't the only way the two had bonded. Before too long, the girls were inseparable, and not long after that, Yuto had accepted Fu calling her Oni-san. Naruto wasn't jealous though. He still got to spend as much time as he liked with his Imoto, and he enjoyed that time immediately. For as long as he could remember, he had wanted a family. He had something like that with Gaara, but to have it on this level was indescribable. Gaara would always be his best friend, and he could never look at Tanguya like that again, so his relationship with Fu was truly unique. Hey guys, they had slid and jumped down the mountain to the lower training grounds where they found an equally sweaty Fu and Yujito sitting on a boulder chatting. With a blush, Naruto couldn't help but notice the way the sweat shimmered on Yujito's skin, catching the sun. He loved Taiyo with all his heart, but he was still a 15-year-old boy, and Yujito was a very attractive 19-year-old. He hid his blush as he walked over, waving back at Fu, who had spotted him immediately. Hey Oni-san, you missed Yujito-sensei do something awesome. Naruto smiled. When training Fu was always called her mentor and surrogate sister sensei. It stopped her as associating the harsh training she was put through with her loving sister. Oh really? What did I miss? He jumped onto the large boulder they were sitting on and plumped down next to them, throwing an arm around Fu's shoulder, which she snuggled into. She changed into Matatabi, like full on and everything. Naruto just looked around his gushing sister to a now embarrassed Yujito, a little bit of awe in his eyes. Fu, are you sure this wasn't one of Yujito's genjutsu? Remember that one that made you believe you lived on a pirate ship where men could stretch their limbs like rubber? Fu just sighed exasperately. Naruto would never give that up after she came home excited about it after one training session. No, I'm serious. She turned to Yujito in a huff. Come on, Yujito-sensei, show Naruto that awesome flaming cat form. Said woman just chuckled to herself. Fu is right, Naruto. I am able to transform into my Biju. It's one of the many perks of being in full control. Naruto's eyes widened at that. Honestly, he had really thought it was a prank of some kind, but that she could actually transform into the Nibi itself was impressive. Wow, okay, that's cool. I'd love to see that. Yujito just shook her head while smirking, getting Naruto's narrowed eyes. I can't do it that often. It takes a lot out of me and Matatabi. Naruto just nodded, slowly a little disappointed before he spun on the boulder to ask if B could do it, but he had already taken the opportunity to vanish. Hey Kurama, could we do that someday? He felt the old vixen shake her head sadly, and Naruto frowned. Why not? You forget, Naruto, half of my chakra is sealed away in the stomach of the Shinigami. Even if you master all of the chakra inside your body, that is still only one half of my original power. Without my yin chakra, we could never transform back into myself completely. If you really wanted to, when you reach that level of control, you could use my chakra to simply hench into me if you wanted. I guess I might find that flattering. Naruto shared a laugh with his tenant. It was a disappointing revelation, but it did get him thinking. What's it like to be separated from half of your chakra? He felt the shudder from inside of him. It must have been an unpleasant experience. It made an experience to make the creature like the QB act in such a way. Not pleasant, Kit. The damn Shinigami literally dragged it out of my body, and it felt like I had forever lost the source of heat in my own body. Still though, even without my yin, I am more powerful than any of my siblings. That also made Naruto think. Kyubi was an incredibly powerful entity. Even now, she must have been positively immense before the sealing. It must be very unbalancing. He felt her sigh and just decided to drop the conversation that was obviously causing the Biju displeasure. Sorry, just curious. He felt her nod before she went quiet, probably slinking off to a corner of his mindscape. Oni-san? His eyes came back into focus to see Fu's caramel hand waving in front of his face, and he blushed from being caught dazing. Sorry, just talking to QB. He shook his head and looked at Fu and Jito again with a smile. Anyway, I would like to see that sometime, Yujito. It would be cool. The girl nodded with a small smile, reminding Naruto why it was worth it to befriend the woman. Anyway, Fu, eventually you should be able to transform into Chome by yourself. How cool would that be? The mid-haired girl's eyes seemed to sparkle, not having thought of that. Yujito quickly nipped it in the bud, though, not wanting to get the girl's hopes up so soon. That won't be for a long time, Fu. I had to spend years refining my control over Matatabi's chakra, and your Biju has more tails, so in theory, it should be even more difficult. Naruto's only able to do what he does because of the way his seal is designed, so unless you get a master Fujitsu user to alter your seal, it's going to be long and hard training ahead of you. Fu pouted a little, drawing out her puppy dog eyes without even realizing it, and turning to Naruto. Oni-san, you know seals, right? Could you help me? Naruto almost wanted to say yes under such a powerful attack from her watery orange eyes, but he managed to chuckle. I'm a bit too humble to call myself a Funjutsu master. He looked away and thought, but I have been rather neglecting the field, and it has always interested me. Hell, after the Fujin no Iki showed me what I could do with it, I'm almost surprised I didn't lock myself away for another year to study it. He looked back at Fu. I'm going to train myself in sailing more. Maybe then I could help you. Fu beamed brightly, all hint of her puppy dog eyes gone, as she enveloped her brother in a hug. After all, how hard could it be to find a Funjutsu master to train me? It had been 3 months since Naruto had thought that fateful line, and he cursed himself every day for it. It turned out that Funjutsu might as well have been a dying art. There was literally no masters of it left except for Jiraiya of the Sannin. Of course, all the ones he knew who were proficient on the art lived in Suna. No help there then. He made do with the scrolls he found in Kumo's library, which were surprisingly effective. He read as much as he could when he could, absorbing everything with ease. He had once been told he had an almost unnatural knack for the subject, surprising and surpassing most that tried to teach him. He just simply understood it, how the various arrays worked, how they fit together, and what could or couldn't be tweaked. In fact, recently fiddling with already existing seals was a pastime, something he did if he had a spare moment. Already, he had managed to increase the power and range of the standard explosive tags Kumo had used with only a minor modification. This action elicited a response from the Raikage, namely to allow him access to many of the older and more valuable sealing scrolls he had in his personal library. This was in exchange for any breakthrough Naruto made during his stay in Kumo, which he was happy to agree to if it gave him more study and learn. Fu had once told him it was like he was addicted to the art, and Naruto had a hard time arguing with the girl. The feeling he got when he finally unlocked the mysteries of a complex array or designed one for himself were nearly euphoric. He also had an ulterior motive to his work. While he enjoyed it for himself, he also knew that with the more he learned, the better equipped he would be to finally help Taiya rid herself of the cursed seal. It was one of the many goals that kept driving him forward in finding more and more information. Before he knew it, he was standing over Fu's prone body with her on her stomach on the bed. Her shirt was raised up, allowing him to see the intricate and spiraling seal that adorned her right shoulder blade. He looked it over with a now trained eye, noticing the complex and subtle layering within the seal itself that allowed for the chakra absorption and suppression of the Nanabi. He had been doing this a lot for the last week, and the stack of notes building up on the small desk next to him was proof of that. He had promised to Fu that he would adjust her seal to allow more chakra flow, and that was exactly what he planned to do. He was just lucky that it wasn't the type of seal that needed a key, or he wouldn't have been able to do anything. As it was, he was now in the process of tracing out complicated kanji in specific orders around, and so often he would have a trail of them emerging from the rings he created to wind further around her body. Luckily, he planned it so he wouldn't have to draw anywhere indecent. He wasn't Jiraiya after all, and Fu was his little sister, even if not in blood. It took almost half an hour with Fu staying perfectly still and him drawing with his tickling ink brush before he could stand back, a satisfying grin on his features. He looked around to Yujito and B, who actually looked rather bored having to wait this long. They were there in case something went wrong. Naruto found it a little insulting that they didn't trust his skills, but he was young, so he understood their position. He took a deep breath to alert them that he was ready before moving back over to where Fu was waiting a bit more patiently. Alright, Imoto, I'm ready to do this. If it all goes how I want it, this should increase the rate Nanabe can input her chakra into your system. Not by too much, of course. I wouldn't want to hurt you. Even so, I figure that isn't going to be the most pleasant of experiences, but I have to ask that you try and keep as still as possible while the seal is still completing itself. Fu nodded him, biting her lip out of worry. She trusted her brother, but he had told her repeatedly that forcefully expanding one's chakra coils would not be pleasant. With one last check to make sure absolutely everything was perfect, Naruto pulled in a deep breath and channeled chakra to his fingers. It took nearly all his chakra control just to manage this, but a small blue flame appeared around his digits, which he quickly used to inscribe over Fu's seal. He added some parts that would need that he would quickly use to inscribe. He needs some parts that would be needed, as well as removing a few others that weren't critical to its integrity. Finally, he gave a small flick of his wrist to ever so slightly increase the size of the swirl of the center of the seal. With a burst of chakra from his entire palm, all the kanji he had drawn began to writhe over Fu's body. They snaked inwards in a large circle before they combined into intricate arrays that B and Yujito couldn't follow. They were quickly absorbed into the original seal before Fu let out a gasp of pain as she felt fire enter her blood and travel through her whole body. Naruto put a firm hand on her shoulder, trying to ease her tension as much as he could. A soft yellow glow began to appear over Fu's body, and in the corner of the room, Yujito and B looked worried, fearing that the Nanabe might have been released. Naruto just narrowed his eyes, still holding firmly to Fu's shoulder as the last of the extra seals disappeared under the original, and Fu thankfully slumped back into the bed. Yellow glow gone, Naruto smiled kindly down at her. She would probably be unconscious for a few hours, but when she woke up, she would feel the effect of the altered seal. He also smiled to himself. This was his first step as a Fujitsu user, and he couldn't be happier about it. Naruto slid down the banister of the staircase in the Raikage mansion, followed shortly after by Fu. They both laughed as they slid down the polished wood, ending in a small but graceful flip from the two of them. Naruto managed to land in front of a squad that was just now getting back from a mission, and stared at him and the mid-haired girl behind him oddly. He just smiled back at them, already knowing who they were, and thanks to introductions from Yujito. Hey, Kanri, Samui, Omui, you just got back? The three older shinobi and Konoichi nodded. Karui with a smile, Omoi with his usual bored look, and Samui with her indifferent expression. Despite how she acted around people, Naruto knew Samui was a good person at heart. She cared for her teammates, and their sensei even thought it wasn't obvious from the way she acted. Hey Naruto, Fu, what are you talking to Raikage-sama about? Naruto just smirked at Katori. She had become a great friend for him, not to mention an excellent sparring partner. She wasn't as skilled with Genjutsu as B was, so it was good to hone his skills against her, making the fights with B that little bit easier. Sometimes he would take on Omui, Samui, and her all at once to get them to somewhat evaluate B's multiple sword fighting style. Not a lot, just returning a scroll I borrowed. Karui just nodded in understanding. Naruto's passion for all things Fujitsu was legendary by now. Some people actually coming to him with jobs of the nature. He was about to continue when all five of them heard an incredible high-pitched squawk coming from the entrance to the Raikage Tower. They turned in time to see a rather large falcon burst through the doors quite spectacularly and start to circle around the ceiling. Huh, shouldn't that be the bird tower? The three Kumo shinobi just nodded dumbly, staring at the strange sight of the bird circling indoors. Suddenly, its lively eyes caught Naruto's body, and in a flash, its head swiveled and its wings filled and its wings tilted. Much to Naruto's surprise, the bird suddenly came crashing down on him and would have bowled him over without B's endurance training. Instead, he managed to catch the large falcon with one hand, already around its neck, and the other around its feet. He immediately noticed the scroll attached to the bird's back and quickly slid it out of the little carrier case it came in. Then, to everyone's surprise, the bird just up and burst into a small cloud of smoke. After everybody was gone, coughing and swatting the annoying white cloud away, Naruto stared dumbly at the roll of paper in his hand. "Huh, must have been a summon." Fu was now behind him on her tippy toes, trying to speak over his shoulder at the scroll. She had grown in the 10 months they had been in Kumo, but then again, so had Naruto. "What's it say?" Naruto turned the strange scroll over in his hand, surprisingly finding "for shithead" written on the side. His face lit up in a gleaming smile as he looked over the scroll again. As Team Samui came over to look at it. "Who's it for?" Naruto kept his grin on his face. "It's for me." Samui just seemed confused as she read the message on the side, especially after seeing Naruto's grin. "Then why does it say "for shithead"?" Naruto just grinned even wider. "It's for my girlfriend." Again, he got some very strange looks from the three-cloud shinobi. Fu was more understanding as Naruto had told her a lot about Tayuya. "It was great seeing you guys. I'll catch you around, but I'm gonna head home and check out the scroll." Team Samui just shared a collective shrug and nod before brushing past him to climb the stairs he had moments ago still slid down. Naruto paid them no mind. After all, he simply pulled Fu onto his shoulders like he used to do and stepped off. "Hey, I'm not a kid anymore. You don't have to carry me." Naruto just smirked as he carried on running. "Oh, and who was it that said it's part of a brother's job to be a taxi service? Anyway, I know you love it." Fu quieted down. He was right. She really did love it when he would do this for her. She was a shinobi in training now, so she could run quickly, but that was nothing compared to Naruto. He was impossibly fast, and she liked the wind rushing past her at those high speeds. She noticed he was climbing higher instead of moving towards the house, and she smirked. He must have really wanted to get home quickly. When they reached a point where they could both make out Yujito's house far below them on the mountain, Naruto threw his special kunai with deadly accuracy. It struck the side of the house without a sound. Naruto having already completed his silent seal and adding them to his weapons. A brief tingling across Fu's skin later, and they were outside the house. Naruto already removing the kunai from the wall. "You know, Oni-san hates it when you do that. It leaves marks in the walls." Naruto just shrugged with Fu still on his back. "I'll buy her some sashimi later, and she'll forget all about it." The girl was addicted to the stuff. It was even funny. Naruto thought he could pack away the food, but Yujito was on another level to him entirely. She said it was because he had yet to find his soulmate of foods, but he just found her a little weird whenever she spoke like that. Everybody just figured it was because of the cat-like influences she got from Matatapi, and those weren't even the only things she got. Naruto walked into the house with a small smile on his face. B had been taking a fairly easy day, so he wasn't nearly as worn out as usual. He stepped across the threshold, immediately looking for Fu and Yujito. He was glad the two were getting along, even if he and Yujito hadn't quite found common ground after their first day. The woman was just cold to him. She trusted Fu because she was young and innocent, while it wasn't nearly as easy to let Naruto in. She wasn't too worried she would come around eventually. He was too worried she would come around eventually. Naruto had once been told that he just had a natural way of bringing people around, of making friends out of enemies. He checked the ground floor and couldn't see them. He was a bit sad as he thought he could see his extra energy to do. He could use his extra energy to do something with Fu. He shrugged it off and decided to go find a Fuinjutsu scroll to curl up with and study. He was suddenly put on alert as he heard strange sounds from upstairs. He rushed up in case it was an attacker or burglar. As he approached her, he once again noticed the strangeness of the sounds. It was like a growling or a moan that sounded bestial, bestial, but yet was definitely human. The sounds came from Yujito's bedroom, and worrying that she was in danger, he burst through the wooden door. The sight that met his eyes would not have crossed his mind, nor would it leave it in years. Yujito was spread out on her bed, clutching her sheets as her body arched up and down in supposed agony. However, the first thing Naruto noticed was the fact that the woman was wearing nothing but her headband. Naruto's eyes nearly shut out of their sockets as he immediately swiveled on his feet, hands already firmly clasped over his eyes. So Yujito heard noises, and there were shouts, and I'm sorry. He tried to stumble out of the room, but he heard the pained panting behind him stop, and he could almost feel Yujito's eyes boring into his skull. Naruto's eyes opened even further behind his hand as he continued to fumble his way out of the room. Naruto! Wait! He froze mid-step, his mind overloading from that simple statement as he failed to understand what was going on. From what he knew of women, they didn't like guys walking in on them like this. That meant she was stopping him so she could punish him. Yujito, I'm sorry. He was cut off mid-sentence as he felt Yujito's body pressed up against his back, her very warm, sweaty, and naked body. A finger was pressed up against his lips to silence him. Not that he could even make a sound as his brain nearly exploded from the contact. Naruto, I need you. Her voice was a mix between a whisper and a moan as she turned him around with her hands and slowly pried his hand away from his face. His eyes were clenched firmly shut, still not knowing what was going on and whether or not it was a test. He just hoped he wasn't like Uncle, teasing him only so that she could punish and humiliate him later. Yujito was her finger was once again placed sensually against his lips to silence him as she leaned forward, leaned her whole body against him. Naruto gulped loudly as two soft yet firm mounds pressed up against his chest as he idly noticed his pants were becoming tighter. What is it, Naruto? Don't you like me? He just stuttered out something unintelligible, his eyes still closed the confusion and fear. Then why won't you look at me? He just shook his head firmly, and he could almost imagine her cute yet convincing pout filled with sexual energy. I just need you for a little while, Naruto. That's all. Naruto's eye twitched dangerously behind his closed eyelids as he wondered just how many guys would kill to be in this situation with a beautiful woman like Yujito. She took his hand and he unintentionally opened his eyes a crack to see what she was doing, only to regret it instantly. At that moment, she firmly took his hand and planted it right on her ample breast, using her own hand to knead it into the soft flesh. Naruto nearly fainted there, and then put a sudden burst of adrenaline. Nearly fainted there, and then. But a sudden burst of adrenaline had him yank the hand out of her strong grasp, turn promptly, and run out of the room. He ran straight at the house, not stopping for anything or anybody until he reached his training ground, where he collapsed to the ground, confusion overtaking him. Killer had later explained to him that Matatabi had a certain effect on Yujito on specific days in the month. He compared it to a cat going into heat, and Naruto had to agree with his analogy after witnessing it firsthand. Luckily, that was exactly the moment that the ice broke between him and Yujito, the two of them becoming good, if not slightly awkward, friends. Not too soon after. Of course, if the year ever found out, he was certain to at least lose a limb, so after a long and difficult internal debate of about 2 seconds, he reasoned that it was perfectly natural to have a few secrets. He and Fu walked into the house, greeting Yujito warmly when they saw her cooking up some food in the kitchen. She was curious about the scroll in Naruto's hands, but he simply explained it was from his girlfriend. The reaction he got was a little strange, but he can't explain it. Yujito blushed a little before looking away almost guiltily. Naruto usually would have put more thought into it, but he was too excited by the message from Takuya. He laid the scroll down on the table and opened it up after cracking the fairly poor seal on its front. He smirked as he read the first words, "Hey shithead." Well, that was always a good start. End of chapter 35.